Batman Begins is the best live-action Batman film. Don't at me, don't argue with me, I'm 100% right. Now, don't get me wrong, I love The Dark Knight. I really do. It's just that when I watch The Dark Knight, it feels long, but the thing about it is that I wouldn't cut anything from The Dark Knight, so I don't know, I just don't think I vibe with The Dark Knight as much as I vibe with Batman Begins, because to me, Batman Begins feels like, a Frank Miller graphic novel, like Batman Year One, like The Dark Knight Returns, brought to life and put on the big screen. From the more stylish cinematography to the lighting to the screenplay. I adore this screenplay. Lines like, "It's not who I am underneath, but what I do that defines me," feels so much like comic book Batman. I love it. And speaking of the Frank Miller graphic novels, you really can feel the influence of The Dark Knight Returns and Batman Year One in particular in this film, specifically with a lot of the imagery. I mean, there are scenes that are sort of taken from Year One and translated into Batman Begins. For example, the scene where Bruce sees the bat flying around in the manor is adapted from Batman Year One. In Year One, Bruce is bleeding out on the sofa as a bat comes flying through the window, giving Bruce the inspiration of, my symbol of terror will be the bat. But in the Nolan film, he changes it a bit. Bruce sees the bat and then he goes back into the cave where, he saw the bats when he was younger. And then the film does something so amazingly rich and thematic with it where Bruce essentially faces his fear in order to become fear, and the bats swarm all around him, and then he rises from the ground and he becomes the Batman.
The Batman.
I adore that scene. There's of course the inclusion of Detective Flash, who is changed from the graphic novel. In the graphic novel, he's pretty much just he's a jock type character. He bullies Gordon a bit. He's like, "Hey Gordon, take on the take." And then he beats up Gordon, and then there's that whole thing where Gordon then beats up Flash and leaves him naked in the snow and all that kind of stuff. But Nolan changes him just to be a bent fat cop, and to be honest, there is a lot of comedy with Flash. "Flash, I have a kid to feed." What, they don't like falafel? And then of course there is the inclusion of a slightly younger Jim Gordon dealing with the troubles of Gotham City. Another thing too that is really interesting with this film in particular is that there's a lot of visual imagery taken from Batman the Mask of the Phantasm, which many could argue is the best Batman film, which I could agree with, since it's basically the animated series team, but they just made a Batman film, and it feels like Batman. And so it's nice to see that Nolan and company took some influences from Mask of the Phantasm. For example, Bruce's vigilante suit is just Bruce's vigilante outfit from Batman Mask of the Phantasm. And also, the way Bruce looks in the flashbacks in his early 20s when he goes back to Gotham to see the trial of Joe Chill. And he very much resembles animated Bruce Wayne from Mask of the Phantasm from the animated series. Another one of the reasons why I adore Batman Begins is because this is the origin story of Bruce Wayne becoming Batman. You feel the journey of Bruce in this film, his arc from that angry young kid to the man that becomes the hero of Gotham, the Batman. And one of the way the film effectively shows Bruce's change throughout the film is with the whole theme and motif of fear. At the beginning, we see a young Bruce Wayne terrified of these bats, but throughout the film, we see him become more comfortable with the bats. Again, like I mentioned earlier, the scene with the bats in the cave where he is crouching and hiding, and then he rises again, facing his fear to become fear. There's the inclusion of Scarecrow, whose whole thing is about fear. You've got the idea of Carmine Falcone running Gotham City because of his influence and power, and he's able to get that influence and power through fear. And look, people say that they are tired of seeing the death of the Waynes, and honestly, I don't mind seeing the death of the Waynes. I like it. I also love the way Batman Begins depicts the death of the Waynes. It may not be the most pretty thing like Zack Snyder and Larry Fong's work in BVS, where they make the most pretty, symbolic version of the death of the Waynes, the slow motion, Hans Zimmer's rising score, the beautiful light theme. It's not like that. In Batman Begins, Nolan takes a very realistic approach. And you can also tell that this is a much younger Christopher Nolan. He's not that far into his career, and so he does do a lot of close-ups, a lot of quick editing. But despite the questionable editing choices, I actually really feel the death of the Waynes in this film. And one of the reasons why I love this interpretation of the death of the Waynes is Linus Roach's version of Thomas Wayne. I just love how warm and comforting and calm he is. Like, when he is dying, you still feel his warmth. When he tells Bruce, "Don't be afraid," you feel it. You feel that, hey, I need to look after my kid even though I'm dying. I need to tell him not to worry. I felt it. That resonated with me. And then the following scene between young Bruce and Alfred is genuinely heartbreaking. I mean, when young Bruce is just like, "Alfred, it's my fault. I told them to go out into the alleyway. It was all me." And then Alfred's just like, no, Master Wayne. Is everything bad that happened there? That was him, not you. And just, I don't know why. Every time recently I've been going back to this film, the scene actually makes me tear up a lot. Like, I don't know why. I think it might just be Hans Zimmer and James Newton Howard's score and the way that is mixed together with the performance Nolan manages to get from Michael Caine and the young actor who plays Bruce. But just, I love it. Like, you genuinely feel the emotion. And so I find it interesting, actually, how in modern day, when people talk about Christopher Nolan, sometimes they call Nolan an emotionless director, which, I mean, is just silly, because if you want to see a heartfelt Nolan, just go back to Batman Begins, because, I mean, there is so much heart and love and emotion and care put into Batman Begins. Now, definitely one of my favorite parts of the entire film is the training sequence between Bruce and Ducard / Ra's al Ghul. That whole sequence to me is amazing, and one of the reasons why I love it so much is not only the dialogue, but also Liam Neeson as Ra's al Ghul. I mean, just the lines are so iconic, just, I love them. If you become more than just a man, if you devote yourself to an ideal, and if they can't stop you, then you become something else entirely, which is a legend, Mr. Wayne. Theatricality and deception are powerful agents. You must become more than just a man in the mind of your opponent. The training is nothing. Will is everything. The will to act. Gosh, I love Liam Neeson in this role. I mean, he is just utterly perfect as Ra's al Ghul. I mean, granted, he is not Arabian, and that is a problem, but in terms of the performance and the way he portrays this character, he is pitch perfect, and I adore him in this film. I mean, you really feel his pride, and you see his pride when Bruce finally is able to become a successor, and then you feel the heartbreak when Bruce rejects killing the man, and you can tell that, you know, Ra's is pleading with him. He's like, Bruce, please, you have to do this. You can't turn back now. Don't do this. And speaking of Bruce, I love Christian Bale as Batman. He isn't my favorite. That title still belongs to Ben Affleck as Batman, but if anything, Batman Begins has the purest version of Bruce Wayne and Batman ever put to big screen at the time being. Aside from the little detail, which is that Nolan's Batman views being Batman as a temporary thing, whereas in the comics Bruce sees being Batman as his never-ending mission and his never-ending war, the version of Bruce Wayne and Batman that we get in the film is the most pure representation of the character.
People need dramatic examples to shake them out of apathy, and I can't do that as Bruce Wayne. As a man, I'm flesh and blood. I can be ignored, I can be destroyed, but as a symbol, I can be incorruptible. I can be everlasting.
I mean, Christian Bale just nails every side to Bruce Wayne. The playboy persona, the billionaire eccentric CEO, but not only that, the human side when he is with Alfred, when he's with Rachel. And honestly, I also really like his Batman in this film too. I like the voice in this film. It's not the over-the-top, Dark Knight, this city rejected you type of voice. It's much more of a deeper growl. It's a whisper growl. He's sort of like, all right, Alfred, this is the plan. I am going to do this. It's not who I am underneath, but what I do that defines me. It's a much more reserved Batman voice, and in many ways, this was the blueprint for Charlie Cox's Daredevil voice. I mean, that's not to say that Christian Bale doesn't go a bit over the top at times. Where were the other drugs going?
Where were the other drugs going?
I swear to God.
Swear to me! Alfred!
Rachel! But there's just something about the way the film depicts Bruce Wayne becoming Batman that just resonates with me. I love the little details of him hanging out with Lucius and then assembling the costume. And speaking of the costume, I actually think this is the better of Christian Bale's Batman costumes. I'm not a fan of the Dark Knight costume, it's too PC, and I'm not a fan of the cowl, and yeah, it's cool he can turn his neck, I'm not a fan of it, it's too tactical. But in Batman Begins, it's both tactical, but it also feels like, yeah, he is the monstrous Batman from the comic books. Because I like Batman being big and bulky, and with the Batman Begins suit, you get that. You get the big and bulkiness. I also like that Nolan allows the cape to drape over Batman, allowing it to create some really cinematic silhouette shots that feel like it's been ripped out of The Long Halloween or something. They're genuinely amazing. And because we see Bruce assembling the suit, the film introduces us to Morgan Freeman's brilliant Lucius Fox. I love that Lucius Fox knows that Bruce is up to something, and all the dumb excuses that Bruce is giving to Lucius are dumb and stupid, and Lucius isn't a fool, and he's just like, look, you do what you're doing, this stuff is yours, just don't get me fully on involved in it. And because we have Lucius Fox in this film, there is almost like a Bond-like quality to the film, and we know that Christopher Nolan as a director is a massive fan of the James Bond films. You can really feel the influence here. Like, Lucius Fox is essentially Bruce's Q. You know, he's showing him all the gadgets and all that, and because he's showing him all the gadgets, he then shows him the tumbler, and honestly, as a Batmobile design, I love the tumbler. I love the big black tank. I mean, I do prefer a bit of a happy medium with my Batmobiles. I like the more classic Batmobile design, but also I do like the tank design. And just, the tumbler is a cool car, and just, it's so good. Like, when Bruce is all like, does it come in black? Like, that's so good. And the chase with the tumbler is genuinely fantastic. Like, the integration of the miniatures and the practical car, and just the overall thrilling nature of the scene is amazing. I mean, Hans Zimmer and James Newton Howard's score is just blasting through it. I think that's the Molossus track, but it's so cool. I mean, like Bruce says, it's
Damn good television.
now, Michael Caine is the best Alfred, right? I mean, just, you really feel that father-son connection between this version of Bruce Wayne and Alfred. And the thing that I love too is just how loyal Alfred is to Bruce. Even in the flashback scene with young Bruce essentially rejecting the legacy of the Wayne family. It hurts Alfred, but he doesn't give up on him. And that's kind of why, and I know I'm jumping off topic here, I don't really like that Alfred leaves Bruce in Dark Knight Rises. Like, I can kind of buy it, like, oh yeah, I won't watch you die and all that kind of stuff, but just after seeing the sort of arc they go through in Batman Begins, just, I don't buy it, especially with the whole, why do we fall, sir? So we can learn to pick ourselves up. You still haven't given up on me, have you? Never. Like, just, I don't buy that. But also, that exchange is another reason why I just love this film, and why this film, in many ways, is sort of like my comfort film. Whenever I feel low and down, I just sit down and turn on Batman Begins, because that exchange of why do we fall so we can learn to pick ourselves up is just something I need to hear sometimes, and the whole, you still haven't given up on me thing, and never. It's motivational, it's inspiring, and just, there are times in life where you just need something to pick you up. And Batman Begins does that for me. Now, regards to other characters in the film, we have Cillian Murphy as the Scarecrow, and he's fine, he's pretty good. It's just that Scarecrow kind of goes out in a lame way. Like, it makes logical sense if Rachel just tases him, but just, kind of a lame way to go out. But I like how he shows up in the other two Nolan Batman films as, like, little cameos. I think that is cool, particularly in Dark Knight. And there are some pretty cool sequences with Scarecrow in this film, like when he sets Bruce on fire. And then there's the scene where he kidnaps Rachel, and then Batman essentially gasses Crane with the fear toxin. And then we get that really cool, like, black Batman with, like, the goo coming out of his mouth, and, like, Crane is terrified. It's genuinely a cool piece of imagery, and what's even cooler is that that was done practically, which is insane and looks amazing. And speaking of Rachel, I like Katie Holmes as Rachel Dawes. In fact, I prefer her to Maggie Gyllenhaal. I don't know, I just prefer Katie Holmes to Maggie Gyllenhaal just because I buy that Katie Holmes and Christian Bale would be together, not so much Christian Bale and Maggie Gyllenhaal. Like, I don't know. Their dynamic in Dark Knight just seems a bit off. Like, I buy Bale being with Holmes than I do Bale being with Maggie Gyllenhaal. And then we've got Gary Oldman as Jim Gordon, and he is just the best Jim Gordon. I mean, not only does he look like Jim Gordon from the comics, but also just the way Gary Oldman plays it. I gotta get me one of those. The dynamic between him and Batman, I mean, that scene where he meets Batman for the first time in his office. It's genuinely a great scene, and it feels like it's ripped straight out of a graphic novel, the whole,
You're just one man?
Now we're two.
And I mean, honestly, Gary Oldman is just perfect as Gordon. Like, when you think of Jim Gordon from the comic books, from the graphic novels, he's just ripped straight off the page. He's genuinely fantastic. Now, one thing that isn't the strongest thing with this film is the action. You can tell that this is Nolan very early on in his career, and Nolan wasn't the best action director. There are too many close-ups and there are too many quick cuts. And whilst Nolan has certainly improved on his action later on in his career, like in Inception and in Tenet, the action in the Dark Knight trilogy is not the best. There are times actually in Batman Begins where I do like the quick cuts and the close-ups. The scene where Batman first appears at the docks is genuinely a really effective scene. I mean, that quick cut sequence where, like, the camera's spinning around and there's so many cuts, you're like, what is going on? I like it because it's supposed to put us in the headspace of the criminals. Like, they don't know what's going on. What the hell is attacking them? And I mean, that scene is pretty sweet. I just adore the moment where the guy's just like, where are you? Here. Ah, it's the best. And of course, when Falcone's all like, what the hell are you?
I'm Batman.
It's genuinely just so perfect. Like, you really just feel, yeah, he has become Batman. But aside from that sequence, yeah, the action in terms of the close quarters combat is not great. It does feel very disorientating, particularly the fight with Bruce and Ra's on the train. It doesn't work for me. But I mean, like I mentioned earlier, Nolan really thrives in his car chases, and the Tumbler car chase is genuinely amazing.
Damn good television.
And I won't lie, there are a few corny moments in Batman Begins.
And if that pressure reaches us, the water supply right across the whole city is gonna blow.
And the moment where Batman says,
You never learn to mind your surroundings.
it doesn't work for me. Like, I get it. It's meant to be a setup and a payoff moment. Like, oh, Bruce has finally managed to, beat his master in combat. But just, it doesn't work just because it's so quick. And also, Batman didn't beat Ra's by using his surroundings. He just flipped him around. And it's like, okay, that's kind of corny. Like, I get what you're doing. It just didn't work. And look, in regards to the no-kill rule, the film firmly establishes, yes, Bruce will not, personally kill someone. But, kind of like Batman in the comics, he is responsible for, like, a crap ton of collateral damage. And in a way, it's kind of similar to Batfleck. It's just that Batfleck was purposefully angry and vengeful, and so people saw him as the bad guy. And, like, you look at Bruce in Batman Begins, he just accidentally does stuff, but he isn't intentionally going out of his way to kill people. And, I mean, yeah, it's a weird grey area, but I still firmly believe that Bale's Batman, particularly his version of Batman in Batman Begins, is the purest form of comic book Batman that we have gotten in live action. And I mean, Nolan just knows how to end these films. The way this film ends is genuinely perfect. The conversation between Batman and Gordon is great. The Joker tease with the Joker card is just perfect. You see that card flip over and you see Joker and you're like, oh my god, I can't wait for the next one. And then we get the exchange of Batman and Gordon where Gordon's like, I never said thank you. And Batman's just like, and you'll never have to. And then he jumps off the rooftop, and as he does so, that little drum note from James Newton Howard and Hans Zimmer's score, and then Bruce, opens up his wings, glides off, right at the screen, it cuts to black, Batman Begins, dun dun dun. Oh, it's the best. I love the way this film ends. It is genuinely perfect. I love Batman Begins. Yes, The Dark Knight is beloved by many and is viewed to be the best Batman film. I can't feel the same way. I just love the way the film depicts the origin of Batman. The central theme and idea of the film being fear and overcoming one's fear in order to become fear itself is genuinely fantastic. I love the cast. I love, Nolan's direction. Wally Pfister's cinematography is so stylistic and feels like a Batman graphic novel brought to life. It is genuinely a fantastic origin story of Batman and of any superhero. This is one of my favorite comic book films of all time. I adore it and it's the best. But what do you guys think of Batman Begins? Do you agree with me? Do you think it is the best of the Nolan Batman films? Or are you a fan of The Dark Knight and The Dark Knight Rises more? Let me know in the comments down below. Like, subscribe, follow me on social media, all that good stuff. It's all down in the description. And until we meet again, I'll see you guys next time.